I guess just if you grew up in Scotland, you have a certain attitude towards things and creatively too. I think there's a sort of self-deprecating culture. Can be quite a positive thing actually if you're doing creative work. I suppose when we started going to London with the band in the 90s, we did notice that we felt like outsiders a bit, but that was never a negative thing for us.
When is nationalism in music actually a good thing? Like pride, like people being really proud of who they are and where they come from, and that place having its own sound. Well, that was one of the questions I asked this week's guest on the Drown in Sound podcast, the band Idlewild. They have been going for almost 30 years, and I think I've seen them play live most years for those 30 years. I mean, at least it feels like that. They were one of my first favourite bands. I absolutely adored seeing Roddy roll around the floor, screaming, "What's your ideas for Captain?" The way in which they brought that kind of ferocity of Nirvana and the eloquence and literary kind of magic of REM together into this heady brew of like proper art rock, like music that made you feel all the emotions, but also like a sensitive core to it, and a sense of music being this kind of starting point on life's journey to like discover books and films and other artists to dive into and delve into. And for me, they were such an important band, and I would be honest, I don't think there would have been a Drown in Sound if it wasn't for Idlewild. They were one of the core bands that brought together our initial team, because Drown in Sound wasn't launched by me, it was launched by about 20 of us. Kids on message boards, kids on the internet that wanted to write, wanted to make something, wanted to bring people together, people that maybe had their own fanzines. And Idlewild were just such a core band. I think they inspired so many people, and I think a lot of people felt like, well, we can have this collective energy to drive a band like Idlewild into the world. So with their 10th album coming up, which is their first self-titled release, a record which I've only had for a few days, but I think is really exceptional. This is definitely up there with their best. And we had a great chat. We talked a lot about what's been going on with the band, like how they've approached this record. I asked them quite a few questions sort of just about their identity, because I think they've always been a band that's been quite hard to pin down and make sense of. So I hope that you will enjoy this conversation with Roddy Woomble and Rod Jones as much as I did. It was such a pleasure to chat to them. Stay tuned for the end. We're going to have some extra thoughts and a few updates on some bits that's going on with Drown in Sound. So to set the tone for this interview, you've described your music in a few interviews as being an exchange of ideas. What do you mean by that? Because no one's asked the follow-up question.
What I mean by that when I said that was it was more to do with the way that I approached bands when I was younger. I was never interested in like the technical ability of the band. I was never interested in like, the production of the records, anything like that. I was just really interested because I suppose like a lot of people my age, my introduction to real ideas was through seeing live music. So, and that was an exchange of ideas, and you'd be going to watch these underground American rock bands that were really noisy and kind of almost like quite rudimentary and, the best possible way. That's what you felt like. They were just sharing their ideas in this kind of raw format. And I suppose that's the principle of what Idlewild were about when we started, because we were a live band for many years before we started, even considering recording as being something that we would, be good at or, do. It was all much.
Do you remember maybe a way of thinking or a selection of books or films and everything else that sort of came out of that soup of seeing those bands in the early days that sort of inspired you to both pick up those things and then kind of cast them out into the world?
The exchange of ideas thing for me has always been, I think that any kind of songwriting or any kind of music making is that, exactly that. It's like a conversation between people, sometimes using instruments instead of words. I actually ran a mental health music project for a while where kind of explored that a little bit deeper. People that weren't able to really communicate with each other normally were able to kind of write songs together. I think it's quite an interesting relationship to have with a bunch of people. It's quite a freeing relationship, and I think it's almost probably the most honest form of communication that you'll have with people in some forms. So yeah, I think that the fact that we've all got very different musical influences, some that when we formed were similar, certainly, the kind of Sonic Youths and the REMs, I guess, that we all liked. But then we all have gone off on different tangents, and the way that conversation then takes place, I guess, is what makes a band so different from a solo artist. It's a kind of a stew made of all of those ideas and those influences coming together, which makes it more, I suppose, easier to be unique as a band than it is to be unique as a solo artist.
So it's being a solo artist, talking to yourself.
Yeah, essentially. First sign of madness.
I think one of the things I took away from being a fan of your band in the early days was just the references to different books and writers, and the sense that you weren't just playing shows and rolling around and getting sweaty and disappearing into the night, that you were sort of trying to leave something with people and implant something on people. And I feel like that doesn't happen as much now. Like there's references maybe, but I feel like
I was influenced by bands. That was part of the bands that I liked. It wasn't just like, yeah, obviously it was the records, but it was the whole aesthetic of the band, the way they put themselves across, the album covers, the the things they talked about in interviews. Because in the 90s or the late 80s, 90s, when I got into music, record reviews were like about 3,000 or 4,000 words. So there was like a lot, and live reviews were too. So it was a lot of detail. And I would pour over the music press every week and learn about these kind of bands. And that's the kind of band that I wanted to be in, that would talk about the things that they read and the paintings they'd looked at and the films they'd watched and referenced things like that. It was like a whole world around it, like the Smiths, I'm thinking maybe, or even the Velvet Underground or REM or, even Nirvana and Pavement. They all contained their own world,
I feel like Patti Smith has set a template for you and your band more than maybe, and all those bands you just referenced, in the way that
I'm a massive Patti Smith fan.
The way that photography was so central to her work, and the way in which, I don't know, I've been digging back through some of your older interviews, and it's interesting. You referenced a lot of these artists, and Patti gets mentioned every so often, but the way you talked about photography and literature and art, like it feels like all those artists maybe took a lead from what Patti was doing, and in a way
she's really like I remember when I went to see Patti Smith, and when she first came back on tour in like 95, 96, I got the bus from Edinburgh. No one else wanted to come with me, so I went on my own, and I stood at the front, and God, it was like mind blowing. And I was a fan of horses and Easter at that point, but it was almost it was like it was art, That's when I realized that. Like I'd always thought that, and somewhere in my mind I thought that it's the art life is in front of you. When you see Patti Smith, it's like everything about her is feeding into other creative practices that she does, and performance is one of them, and she's so powerful when she performs. We were lucky to do some of the remote part with Lenny Kaye, who's obviously from the Patti Smith group, so we kind of got a wee bit closer to all that world a wee bit. But yeah, she's a massive inspiration for me anyway.
Is she someone you've met, or someone that you want to leave as an enigma?
No, I've never met her. I mean, we were lucky enough to see her do when we were recording some of the remote part with Lenny in New York. They were doing a couple of warm-up shows, the Patti Smith group, in a wee club in Greenwich Village, and we went. It was like a sort of 300 capacity club. I went like both nights. Like Lou Reed was there and all that. It was like an amazing experience. So I got close to her there physically, but like, no, I don't. I mean, it would not have anything to say other than just being a fan, So, but Lenny was different. He was like a different sort of character. Very inspiring as well.
Rod, for you, was there anyone that sort of had a kind of influence on, I guess, the sound of the band in a way that because it feels like you were trying to soundtrack Roddy's words and the kind of the energy of the live shows? Was there something in those early days which I think feels like a lot of that energy carries through to now? Is there anything that for you kind of stood out around that time?
I mean, for me, getting into alternative music and I suppose it being in a band as opposed to learning classical instruments when I was a kid, it was my kind of reaction against the kind of formality of learning scales and theory and all of this stuff was Sonic Youth. They were kind of a complete and utter game changer for me. The way that they sort of threw all of the rules out of the window. You know, wrong was right. There was no discordance was melody, and kind of blew my mind the first time I heard it. I think Daydream Nation was the first record I got. And I was like, this is the way I want to play guitar. I don't want to learn how to play like Eddie Van Halen. I want to learn how to play like this. Luckily, that's also a lot easier to some extent. There's a lot less practice involved. But no, I think then that kind of opened the door to all of those, I suppose, early grunge acts and bands that they played with or that they referenced as well. So, obviously into Nirvana and Mudhoney and then into, I suppose, the melodic bands that kind of shared that space, like bands like REM. They were definitely the linchpin that sort of, that kind of sparked something in me. And I think that idea that not everything had to be perfect and not everything had to be so polished. And that's probably the one thing that I've taken through my whole life as a musician and as a producer now, is that the imperfections and sometimes what some would consider to be wrong are quite often really right.
Which is, I guess, also coming from an art background and a photography background, like the idea that something's human is often more powerful than something that's precise.
Yeah, I mean, like that's I've never been interested in the pursuit of perfection. So it's like, it really feels like all art's just abandoned, doesn't it? You just stop it at some point and move on to the next thing. The idea of trying to finish something is like impossible, I always think. So obviously, like, our records don't sound like incomplete, but there's an element of like, you just need to have a point where you just stop working on it and you have to do something different. And that's, I guess, why we've always tried to change. All the records have always sounded a bit different to each other because, we don't dwell on that too much. Well, we did have a period of doing that, I suppose, at the time of Warnings and Promises, but largely it's been quite, there's a freshness to it.
You've talked a little bit in kind of about this record as having kind of perfected your sound, or at least found your sound or got closer to it. But when I've only had the record for a few days and I've been digging into it, and it reminded me, it might be just because of what's happening in the news at the moment, I grew up on the south coast of England, so Scotland felt very romantic and far away and almost exotic in the same way as New York or Paris or something. I don't know why, but to me, like, I think it is. I think you do an amazing job of making it feel like it. And I was listening to Arab Strap, Life Without Buildings, Areogram, and then bands like Frightened Rabbit came along. And I feel like there's a Scottish sound as well, which is part of your sound. And I think the thing that's always been, I guess, discordant for me, is possibly the way of phrasing it, is the idea of Scottish pride. It's different to a kind of nationalism that we have in England, and it's different to like an American patriotism. Like, what do you think it is that's why Scotland is so kind of within the bones of your work?
Well, I mean, I guess just if you grew up in Scotland, you have a certain attitude towards things, and creatively too. I think there's a sort of self-deprecating culture, which is also can be quite a positive thing, actually, if you're doing creative work, because you don't find many people from Scotland that are like kind of full of ego. I mean, obviously you do some, but generally speaking, it's also it's much, much smaller than anywhere in England. I mean, the whole population of Scotland is much less than what London is, so there's not a lot of people. And the communities, like the musical communities, are small. So, and it's got a kind of a friendly culture. I mean, again, I'm generalizing here, but people tend to think that Scotland's a friendly place, and it is largely. It does have a community culture at core, I think, even Glasgow and Edinburgh. So the music scene is very supportive, and bands kind of like enjoy it, seeing each other's bands. That's the way we felt, certainly, always. And I think from that comes this attitude towards your creative work that's just maybe different to London. I mean, I suppose when we started going to London with the band in the 90s, we did notice that we felt like outsiders a bit. But that was never a negative thing for us because we kind of, I mean, I was always drawn to the outsider character in anything, in films or books or. So to be like that was fine. We were totally comfortable with that. Perhaps that's a whole Scottish thing. There's a sort of certain outsider quality to the Scottish artistic sort of mind. I don't know. I know what you mean though. Like all the bands share a certain sound and a certain aesthetic and a certain kind of attitude towards what they're doing that's unlike anywhere else in the UK.
Something in the water.
Yeah, well, the water's nice.
And I think it feels like there's a cultural history that people can be proud of. It, like the more time I've spent in Scandinavian countries, there's a similar kind of feeling of history. And like in Wales, people talk much more about kind of folklore. And I feel like in England, we don't have that. And it's sort of odd to see people talking about nationalism and reclaiming their country and all these kinds of things at the moment.
Well, I'm not going to go into the history of it. Is obviously England's kind of colonialist, isn't it? Its background, and obviously Scotland and Ireland and Wales and stuff suffered from that. So that's obviously historically where it's all kind of based, I suppose. But I'm not going to.
So I'm not going to get you cancelled getting in a complicated conversation about the union.
Well, like listen to someone like Blind Boy or something like that, and he enlightens you on that kind of thing. Yeah. So
his podcast is fascinating, and the way he approaches.
He's a person to He explains a lot of things like that to people, I think, that maybe haven't thought about it. But yeah, so I mean, I forgot what the question was when I started talking about
I don't think there really was a question.
No.
I think I'm just in this. I think I read back one of our old interviews and you talked about a Scottish broth. And I think there's something in the sound of Scotland which it's interesting how it's part of your sound. And yet, like, for instance, there's a bit on, I've forgotten the name of the track off the top of my head.
You held the world in your arms?
No. On the new record, there's a real snarl on the guitars on the opening song. And I was like, oh, that feels like Twilight Sad. But that probably feels like Twilight Sad listening to Idlewild. And there being this kind of like reciprocal kind of sharing of sound and music.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of influence from each other going on there.
One thing that sort of crossed my mind is reading about you being sort of a punk band and the music being loud but not being angry. And I was curious how conscious that is, because there's like a sensitivity and a power to what you do that's, I mean, maybe you do see it as angry and cathartic, but I think there's something interesting about being a loud band that's not shouting about the problems in the world, often talking about existential crises and sort of
postmodernism. And I suppose it was the idea. My idea really was always it's the romanticism of words and the almost kind of wistful take on the ideas I was putting across from my point of view with really like fast, loud music. So it was almost like taking like Rod was saying about Sonic Youth, early Sonic Youth, particularly like Confusionist Sex era, and also a wee bit of like Minor Threat, Black Flag, Speed, but then changing that with kind of murky, mysterious, slightly vague, romantic words about, I don't know, staring into the horizon, that sort of thing. Like the things you do when you're a teenager. So that was the principles of the band. So it was, and I'm not an angry person, so I'm kind of relatively shy. I don't really like the attention of being a front man. So that was also quite a strange difference. You had this band that were really going for it, and then I'd be sitting on the ground or rolling around on the floor. But quite often, like, finding a way not to be the center of attention.
And I guess in a way that's the most punk rock thing you can do.
Well, I mean, it wasn't premeditated, but certainly it became this sort of thing where I used to sort of joke to people about. They would say, "Are you going to do this? Are you going to sit on the floor? Are you going to like stand at the side?" And as if they were stage moves. I'd be like, "Yeah, it's literally ways to try and avoid being in the spotlight."
I guess one of the reasons why I've asked these questions is because a recurring theme that I've noticed is that you've never been a band that really fits anywhere. Like, you feel very much part of a scene in Scotland, but that's not really as defined in people's minds, maybe. Like, you weren't really you came after Britpop when people were talking about Brit rock briefly. Like you appeared kind of to have your most success at a time when it was all American bands like the Strokes and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who I think you probably share more of a kinship with than a lot of what was happening over here. And I find it interesting that by not being able to define who you are, it's allowed you to be defiantly yourselves in a way that's like trying to pin down when someone's like, oh, what do Idlewild sound like if they've never heard you before? As a journalist, you almost end up leaning into kind of reference points people might know, but actually they're a bit of a red herring. And it's I guess the reason why I'm asking this is because I think that you talk about a little bit in your work about kind of identity, and Scotland seems to be such a kind of deep part of that in a way that's I don't know, that feels like something that you're really proud of, but actually it sits in the background because it's only mentioned in like a few songs, and it's sort of the landscape and the hinterland of the work. So I guess what I'm really asking is, where do you feel like you belong? Like when you've traveled the world, are there places where like, oh, well, we feel right here?
Rod, do you want to speak?
I mean, probably here, honestly. I mean, yeah, there are places where we go where we definitely feel more welcome than others, probably, or where we have better shows than others. I mean, we've gone through different periods of our life being in different places, and spent a lot of time in California, which I loved. And also, I think when we were making Warnings Promises, we very much kind of soaked that up, and it very much influenced the sound of the record. And maybe I think wherever we are, that just happens innately. I think, not being a part of we're quite intrinsically linked with the Scottish music scene, but we were never part of the kind of Glasgow scene. Edinburgh didn't really have a scene at that time, and that's probably why we retained a bit of our own identity. And that and the fact that I think that we were most heavily influenced by American bands, predominantly. And like you say, I think we did have more in common with a lot of the American bands of the early noughties and late 90s than we did with any of the British bands. There are lots of British bands from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably beyond that we do like and listen to. But it was definitely deeply rooted in American indie rock, the sound.
Yeah, it was a weird time that whole time, wasn't it? Because like Britpop was when, I guess, like mid-90s, and that's when we formed, and we really didn't like, other than Blur, I don't think I liked any of the bands. So we were kind of a reaction against that. All the records that we had in common when we met were American underground rock records. So that's the kind of band we wanted to be in. And then obviously so when Britpop kind of died away before all the Strokes and the White Stripes and all these amazing American bands arrived, there was this sort of really strange period in music, wasn't it? What was it? There was like all these acoustic bands like they had a name for it.
It was called the New Boring. I think it was called the New Acoustic Movement.
There's something, yeah. So we were like, we came and I remember there was
Breaks and Coldplay and all those kind of.
Well, there was a Coldplay were a wee bit after that thing, but there was a Melody Maker article on like the sound of today or something, and it was like Idlewild, The Unbelievable Truth, and Ultrasound. That was the sort of the bands that were tipped for that. All very different sounding bands. There was no kind of like sort of scene that there was like only a few years later with all the American bands. And like it's true what you say. Like we felt we were much more part of that than anything else, even though we weren't, because we were from Edinburgh and, well, the band were based in Edinburgh, and we didn't have the chance to. We did tour America a bit, but like we didn't have that infrastructure that these American bands have. They come over, there was a big wave of them coming over. They'd find an audience straight away in the UK, and they'd become very popular in the UK. Didn't work like that in America. A band goes to America doesn't.
There was that kind of British need, though, wasn't there, to like have a scene, or call it something, and
there was,
whether it was Britpop or Britpop or new rave or whatever it was, which was a very, I think, England-centered thing that didn't really happen in Scotland. We didn't feel that need to.
Well, it was just
I don't know if that's like I don't know if it's like some sort of. You go harking almost back to what you were saying before, where the kind of the underdog doesn't feel they can be proud of where they're from, but they don't necessarily. Not in an arrogant way, I guess. That's not to say that everyone else is arrogant, but I suppose, I suppose there is a kind of a need to. There was a British need to kind of export this thing of like Britain is best, and this is our how we're going to label our movement, you know. Whereas in Scotland, it was just like, we're a band.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't
We're
really
headlining
feel like you
Barrowland
needed to
soon,
be
come
part.
see us.
Yeah, you know, and that's a phenomenon that carries on today. You know, you've got artists who, like in Scotland, can, you know, sell out 3 or 4 nights at the Barrowlands and play to like 8,000 to 10,000 people, and be completely unaware of people be completely unaware of them everywhere else. You know,
I remember,
especially in folk music. There's lots of really popular folk rock bands in Scotland that don't play big places anywhere else.
I remember when
which is also kind of nice. It's like an indigenous sort of sound, you know.
Yeah, but that's happening everywhere. I think that's that desire for that to sort of, I suppose, regional sort of success has become a thing, hasn't it? You know, you've got like people like Jamie Webster, who like is massive in Liverpool. I mean, I think he's big everywhere now, but you know, you've got all these people who are starting to realise that actually you don't need to necessarily tour the world to be successful, and it's a lot cheaper, which is nice. You don't have to get on a plane.
And I think it also speaks to community as well, doesn't it? I feel like you have much more of a community as a music scene. I was thinking back to the Reindeer Section record and how that brought kind of a lot of artists together. I know it was Gary from Snow Patrol, technically from Northern Ireland, but it felt like a lot of artists came together in a moment in time. And the Broken Social scene, I think, did something similar in Canada, of just like allowing you to find these kind of tributaries off of different artists, which I think was quite
a lot of stuff goes on like that in Scotland, like that, you know, not necessarily recorded work, but like people playing with each other, and you know, those kind of gigs when lots of people are involved. That's that's been a recurring thing. But there's a festival in January in Glasgow called Celtic Connections, which runs for 3 weeks. I'm sure you're aware of it, and that's always got stuff like that going on, like bands play, you know. And so I suppose it's like keeping that, what we were talking earlier on about, kind of spirit of community that there's in Scotland for music and the creative community. And that's, you know, there's always like places to kind of indulge in that if you want to.
One of the first jobs I did when I moved to London was to work for a booking agent. And I booked some of Biffy Clyro's tour dates. And I remember they were playing to like 100 people in Northampton, 300 people in London. And then they were doing like the Hydro or something within like 6 months in Glasgow. It was like this huge jump of just seeing how when a band blows up in Glasgow, especially, it feels like people really get behind them.
Well, I mean, it's a different country, really. I used to get annoyed when we first came down to England, to London to do press and stuff. And Scottish press was seen as regional press. So like it wasn't like that important or something. And I was always like, that's just not fair. It's like, it's our, you know, it's a different country, and if you're popular in Scotland, that means something totally different. You know, you can really, as like we were just saying, there's lots and lots of bands that basically just tour in Scotland and don't go anywhere else. So you can do that. I mean, obviously it's much smaller. It's not like but yeah.
It's like the Cortinas being massive in Manchester.
Yeah, there's like, I quite like that idea though, when you go to, like there was a band, remember the band The Frames?
Yeah, they're huge.
We supported them in Ireland once, and they were playing to like 20,000 people. And I was like, where would you play in Scotland? And they would just play like a small kind of venue.
I think I saw them.
People.
I think I saw them play the Spitz in London to like 150 people, or like around that time. I'm curious about the roles producers have played in your career, and Rod, you've now obviously stepped into that role for the band and for other artists. And I know Dave Ehringer a little bit, and I know what a wonderful human he is. And I'm curious about the alchemy of that man, because I feel like both you and the Manics have been able to create your own worlds, your own identities, your own something that feels very true to you, also littered with literary references as well. What does someone like Dave bring to a band like yours, and what are some of the other producers that you've worked with? Like,
I mean, Dave is a very unique producer. I think he's in that he's not, you know, like he's not one of these people who you instantly recognize his sound. You know, it's not like a Dave Fridman or, you know, someone who's got a real kind of a lane that they're in, where it's like, okay, I recognize who's made that record, or even like someone like Dave Sitek to an extreme, I suppose. Like, I think Dave, his real talent is getting the best out of people. It's like, I think almost 70% of production in the way that he does it, and the way that I've kind of learned to do it from him, I think, is people management. You know, it's it's navigating the dynamics within the band, both musically and personally, and making them feel in the right headspace to create the best performance and music that they can, and then also having the technical ability to make that sound good. And I think that was a real leap for us when we first worked with Dave. I remember it really well, actually, coming out of Jacob's studio for the first two tracks we did with him, which was Little Discourage and Rosability. Me and Colin were in a hire car driving to Glastonbury and listening to it on a cassette, the sort of rough bounces of it, and being like, oh my God, we sound like a real band, like, like a proper sort of band in the charts or something, we're like, it was a real difference for us of having that, it wasn't just someone who could engineer well and make it sound really, I suppose, impressive. It was someone, but he'd very quickly figured out the dynamics in the band and how we interacted as people and where, any problems that would be, I guess, or any, and how to, give everyone what they wanted and make them feel like it was their idea all the time, I suppose. And that's the genius of a good producer, is almost getting the band to do what you want them to do. They feel like it was their idea, and a lot of the time it is. And I think that's where he's a real genius.
He's just good fun as well.
Yeah, he's a lovely man, and one of my closest friends. And I think that's why he has that relationship with those bands. I think there are bands that need someone to come in and be a bit more, light a fire and be a bit more creative. For us, we just needed someone to kind of teach us how to use a studio properly, really, I suppose, and how to perform together and how to gel together. And it changed the band massively working with
He's
Dave.
also not, he's not like, he wasn't hugely older than us too. I mean, he is older than us, but not like, when we met him, we were like 23. He was just almost 20s, he was late 20s. So there wasn't this huge, we felt like he could be like in the band almost, and he sort of assumed that role a little bit like a confidant in that way. He wasn't telling you what to do, which we wouldn't have reacted well to anyway. And that was that straight away that diffused all the kind of presumptions of a producer and what a producer does, and he just became this person, maybe a bit like, Scott Litt with REM, became like an additional member of the band while he was recording them. And I suppose that's why Dave's been so important to the band, over the years, and we've done so many great, songs with him. And even now, if we're working on something, we'll still let him hear it, before get his opinion on it. And
oh God, yeah. I mean, I was sending him the mixes of the records on a daily basis. I mean, which we do, a lot of us do this, and the various WhatsApp groups going around where we ping each other stuff, and sometimes you're getting sent stuff by really big mixers. It's just like, what do you think of this? Is this shit? Because everybody, I think, to be any good at mixing or producing, you have to have a really good level of a dose of imposter syndrome. Like, you really want to be feeling like, I'm going to get found out on this one. It's what drives you to be better, like, really. And I think as soon as I'd mixed the first song, and the first person I sent it to was Dave, before I'd even sent it to the rest of the band, I was like, what do you think of this? Is this any good? And I think it's really important to have people like that in your life, as a band and as a producer. We've worked with a load of producers over the years, and some of them more successfully than others.
Oh, that many, really, when you think about it.
Lenny and Bob and Paul and Stephen and Dave and Tony. There's quite a few.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
I think Dave, obviously, yeah, like I said, Dave kind of, in the studio, kind of felt like home for us a little bit. And we went on a couple of holidays, and we had a great time on one of them. Lenny was a completely different vibe altogether. I don't think we were quite good enough as a band to be able to record with Lenny in the way that we did, but it was a hugely inspirational time for us, and what we learned from that, and actually what we created from that turned into something that was obviously a pivotal moment for the band in American English. But he was an amazingly interesting and inspiring guy. As was working with Bob, we were, his part of that scene that we were still obsessed with, I suppose. And to go to Electric Audio and record there with him,
That's Steve Albini's studio.
Yeah.
yes, was a completely different thing. It was a really exciting experience. But again, not what we were probably used to. It was very much kind of like, right, set up and record. And what do you guys think of that one? Instead of someone going, oh, we should maybe do one more take, which
More
is
like a live gig sound man, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, we definitely needed someone to be like, probably one more, guys.
Stephen Street, he was a big producer to record with. I mean, I produced a lot of my favorite records, so I just didn't really necessarily work out in terms of like maybe the songs we chose, and I don't know what it was, but like, yeah, I did really enjoy recording with him and speaking to him all about the stuff he did. But it just, we went back to Dave Eringa, and that's when we started really. Songs kind of found their place.
So as we're on the subject of sound, let's start talking about the new record, because I think that, I mean, it sounds amazing for a start, like just as a piece of production, like the fact that it can go from all these big, gnarly, loud songs into, it's not even quiet loud, it's like a real kind of like shift of emotion that doesn't feel like the ground's been taken out from underneath you. What was your role, Rod, in kind of capturing this record? How did it feel to kind of be trying to harness it?
I mean, I think we know each other so well now, and we know what everybody's strengths are in the band, and I think, like Roddy said a bit already on this record, we kind of realized what we were good at and where our sound was and what our strengths were, and we weren't trying to sort of look back and too nostalgically, but I think we were just like, this is what we're good at. Let's, with everything we've learned over the last 25, 30 years, even nearly, let's make a record that captures that the best we can, and try to do it in as honest a way as possible without really, just letting everybody sound the way that they sound. Colin has got a unique way of playing the drums in the same way that I suppose I do in guitar, and that neither of us learned traditionally. We play the way that we play, and there's a chemistry in the band that comes from that, I suppose. Andrew and Lucci are, the musicians that kind of put the rest of us to shame a little bit, and they're a little bit more technically skilled than the rest of us. And so that gives us the opportunity to then elevate those ideas and that kind of vibe to loads of different places. So it was really about, like I said, what I learned from Dave, really just letting everybody be themselves and do what they do best in as comfortable a way as they can, and try and capture that without distorting it too much. Really, that's the simplicity of it. It's not as simple as it sounds, otherwise I'll be out of a job. But
make it really loud, just to the edge of distortion.
Almost, yeah. I think I think what I've always sort of looking back at our band, and someone had asked me what I thought, what I liked about our band the most, I suppose, and I think it is that feeling of there is this sort of these fragile but kind of pretty melodies that are on the brink of chaos all the time, I think, and that's sort of harnessed. That's the sound to me. It's that this melodic chaos, I suppose. And I was just trying to capture that as best as I could, really.
That's the opening 10-second preview to this podcast. The how to capture that. Yeah, that's exactly, I guess that's how it feels as a listener. Like, I think people talk about the magic of radio sometimes, is you not really knowing what's going to come next, and things feeling like they've got an energy that's kind of, where's it going to go? And I feel like your live shows often had that sense of everything could fall apart and the PA could fall over any minute, and it's like
still got that.
Still got that. Happened a few times.
I mean, there was I said, we luckily have two really competent professional guys in Andrew and Lucci who hold it together enough that we're on the edge of that destruction at all times, but they sort of pull it back in.
Yeah. One thing I noticed, and I'm wondering if there's any pattern to it, is that it's been a few albums since you had a photograph on the cover of the record. You've sort of had drawings and design for a while. On this record, does it does it indicate anything that you've gone back to photography, or did you just have fun with design for a while?
No, I was actually one of my solo records that I make. I do all the covers always, and generally speaking, I go back to photography because that's kind of what I've got a little bit of a background in, not really much of a background, but I've been taking pictures and I studied it a wee bit, so I feel a wee bit more confident with that than other aspects of visual art, which I still do love. But like, so it was just because I was getting in a wee bit more confidence with how to visualize what I wanted to do with photos. So with Idlewild record, I was saying to everyone that, and everyone kind of leaves me alone, generally speaking, to get on with that. I was wanting to do a color photograph, and I've been doing a lot of double exposure stuff with my photography. So it was just that sort of idea, and then obviously what turned out to be the picture everyone decided to choose for the cover happened to be taken at the exact same spot as the cover for Hope is Important, just facing the other way, because I was at where my mum and dad live, on the east coast of Scotland. So obviously, like, there's like a 28-year gap between the two pictures, and one's sepia color. But the irony of that is it's all sepia, and it's supposed to like an old-fashioned picture, but it's of two teenagers looking at a decayed ship or boat, and now it's vibrant in color and kind of psychedelic, almost looking towards a different horizon, you know. So I suppose there's wee bit of depth there to that those two images side by side with the 30-year in a band that have been together for 30 years, but also just on a purely visual aspect. Yeah, we've only ever used color photography once, Post Electric Blues, which was kind of a very like non-traditional band photograph. It was like over the two sides. So I wanted to do something with color, because color photography is like kind of amazing, and it's not used that much really in album artwork really nowadays. Or there's always a big element of design, you know, to it. I love album artwork. It's like we're talking earlier on about like someone like Patti Smith, or certainly the Smiths, bands that like the album artwork was part of the band. It wasn't like, you know, he wasn't just like, oh, this is the record and we've got some of our tour and then we're just going to put something on the cover. It's a massive part of the band, and that's what it's always been like to me. So it was very important.
I felt like the world building around the band, especially with the earlier stuff you did, was so important. But I thought it was really interesting that one of your t-shirts just said support your local poet. And it feels like going back to some of the bits we talked about before, that sense of community and location. With this record, it feels like there's some reflection going back, but actually I think I read somewhere you felt like quite renewed as a band making this record, because I think, what is it, 6 years since Interview Music? In that time you've had COVID and 3 solo albums, and I'm not sure how many projects you've worked on. You've had Hamish Hawk and a few other things rolled, haven't you? It's like there's been a bit of a gap.
We keep ourselves busy. The gap was it was partly, but mainly after Interview Music and the tour, the idea was to write and record in 2020, and then, you know, maybe have it out in 2021 or 2022. But, you know, obviously in 2 years we didn't see hardly any. You know, we all live in different places, and you weren't allowed to go to the different zone. If, you know, it's all kind of, wasn't it? It was weird how quickly we all forget that. But so we really couldn't do that for 2 years, and we all found our own way to do other things, and like everyone did. So when we kind of started focusing on the band again around the time of the Remote Part anniversary shows, that we were just at a kind of, and that's what that was. They were good catalysts for because suddenly we're playing a record that lots of people love, and they're playing it in the order that people want to hear it, and so it ignites, you know, unites the room, the audience and the band are like basically making the show together. And when you come off stage from that, you're like really kind of pumped about your own music almost. You're like, so that led into let's do another record and let's kind of get this back on. And then, so that's why the record, I suppose, has a kind of euphoric feel to it. It's referencing other music we've made, like Broken Windows or Remote Part, or even more late period records. And it's got a sense of like freshness, and it's looking at the world with kind of eyes open again. And it's like, that's why we call it Idlewild, and that's why the album artwork's kind of vibrant and looking towards something. You know, there's a kind of hopefulness about the record as a whole, you know. It's not too long as well, which is always good.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when I was like, oh, has a few more songs to go, and I I was like, how can you follow this song? The end. What's the song, last track called? It's the end with
In
the
the
sun,
sunrise, yeah.
sunrise. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's like I was like, there can't be anything after this, and it was like, nope, there was nothing after that. You can't follow that guitar part.
Yeah. Also, we consciously didn't want to make it because Interview Music was like our longest record. It was nearly like going on 50 minutes to an hour. And although I'm really proud of it, I think that we didn't want to do that again. We wanted to do something that was very concise. 100 Broken Windows is only like 32 minutes or something.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of wanted to do something like that, 10 songs, and a lot of them to be really kind of catchy as we could make them, as well as, different, having depth in different ways, but like really catchy. So I think that's what we've done.
So you've just done a show at Black Isle Brewery, is that?
Yeah,
and
in the Highlands, yeah.
How did it feel to start playing some of these songs live? Is that the first show?
Yeah, well, not the first show. We played at a festival called Deershed in July. So we just played 2 or 3 of them though. Like we're really looking forward to getting we're in some out stores and then the tour starts. So then we'll kind of get back into playing like a lot more because we'll be in front of like our fans. Because festivals are always you're always very conscious that people might drift away if you start playing like the third new song that no one's heard. So you do tend to sort of stick to sort of songs people know for festivals. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to. I love putting set lists together when you've got a lot of songs now, and we're trying to learn a lot of them so we can vary them a wee bit for people that are coming more than one night. I think the songs will sit really well with the new songs. Will sit really well with the old songs.
No, definitely. They feel like they share a lot of the same kind of DNA, I guess.
Yeah, when you play like I had before, Follow and Discourage or something, it sounds like they belong together.
Did you guys have any thoughts on why people keep saying that rock is dead, but rock seems so resilient? And we're thinking of making just like a list of essential rock albums from the last 25 years because there seems to be this like, I don't know why, collectively columnists every about 2 years decide to report that rock's dead. And then you've got like bands selling out arenas, and what do you think it is about rock music that refuses to be kind of usurped or changed, or kids not want to pick up a guitar and make music? What do you think it is about rock that's
it's just such a kind of visceral thing, isn't it, to make rock music? It's like it's almost kind of tribal for some people, and I don't think that's ever going to go away. I mean, it's always, I suppose, in terms of rock is dead, it's people are looking at like Spotify figures or radio play or any of these things, but like actually people go to rock shows all the time. Like ticket sales for rock shows haven't really changed. People love going in a room and listening to loud music and jumping around. That's never going to change. I mean, probably I could equate that to fucking people dancing around a drum in a cave. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that's always going to be there.
It's also something kind of refreshingly anti-establishment about it. The idea of like, obviously it's got a bit more careerist. You can see bands that are a bit more like, this is what we want to do with our life, be a rock band. But at its core, if you're making music with other people, it's like you're making something together. So it's got that feeling of doing something good together, and also you're like, it's loud and it's expressive, and people react to it instantly. So as a form of art, it's kind of got everything you need. So that's why I don't think it'll ever go away. And there'll be people that'll marginalize it or whatever and say that. But like, no, it's like, Rod was just saying, like, be in a room with a live music and the audience and the band are making the spectacle together. They're all, they're collaborating almost in their roles. And it's a pure feeling that comes from that. That is something that's like, I don't know, it's very addictive. And it will be for humans forever, I think.
What lovely gentlemen, and I hope you learn a lot about the band from that interview. I really loved when Roddy started telling me that the cover to the new record is the reverse of one of their previous covers. Like, that to me is one of those small details that as a fan, just like so lovely to know. And I don't know whether they've told anyone that before, maybe it's in all their interviews. I found that conversation a little bit surreal, because I think they might be like maybe like the second or third band I ever interviewed back in the very late 90s, when I turned up with some scribbled questions, a little bit shaky and a dodgy dictaphone, and I was such a fan then, and I'm such a fan now. I will never grow out of being a fan of certain bands, and I think that there's something about just like their humbleness, which I think feeds into what they were saying about how Scotland maybe keeps you quite humble, which I could really relate to, and I think really comes across. And like I said, there was one answer in there which was like the most Roddy answer possible. There were some extra bits from that, so if you follow us on Instagram, we'll share those over the next few weeks. I asked them a few questions kind of relating to the last 25 years, so we'll be putting bits out there and on our YouTube channel too, so make sure you're following. It's /@DrowningSound on YouTube if you're not watching that there currently, and I think like there's a button somewhere there or there that you can click to subscribe, which is apparently what you're meant to say and be annoying on the internet. I am in the midst of working on kind of celebrating 25 years of Drowning Sound at the moment. We'll have some editorial running across October, and that is when the band's new record comes out. It's self-titled record. Let me double check the date, because I wrote it down and then didn't open my notes before hitting record. The new record from Idlewild, self-titled, is out on the 3rd of October on V2 Records. It's an exceptional record, and I hope that that interview has whet your appetite. There are a few singles you can go listen to now. And yeah, pre-order the record, catch the band doing their in-store tour across the UK, and then they've got some headline dates. They're playing Coco in London, and they're playing the legendary Barrowlands in Glasgow, which I don't know if that's the equivalent of seeing Dolly in Nashville or Elvis in Memphis, but I feel like maybe I need to make a trip to the land of Buckfast to go catch that, which I know Buckfast are technically made in Devon. Don't be pedantic. In fact, do you know what? There was one thing in that interview where I didn't let Rod finish saying something he was saying. I asked him like what projects they've been working on and like what he's been up to, and he told me about this band Humour that he's been producing. They just released a record called Learning Greek. It's really rock, really heavy, and they're going to be opening for Idlewild on some of their upcoming dates, so I'd really recommend checking that out. Rod's also just been working on an EP by Lizzie Reed. You should dive into that. And yeah, check out the Post Electric Studios that Rod runs. It's now become like the home of Idlewild, and I think he's done some amazing projects over the years. Hamish Hawke's record was something that he worked on, he was really proud of. In fact, Rod like reached out to me when he first started working with Hamish, going, "I thought it's really good, you should listen to this," which was really touching to know that I was one of the people on his radar that he wanted to send music to. So I don't have too much else left to say today. That interview was great, and yeah, you get to talk to one of your favourite bands. That's what being a music journalist is sometimes. So yeah, I've been Sean Adams. This has been the Drowning Sound podcast. Thank you to Josh Craggs for producing and editing this. You've been you. See you next time. Bye.